Hey everybody, welcome back. It is Thursday the 30th of October and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern, and just jumping back into this series we're doing on how deconversion from Christianity changes us. And we'll just give everybody a few minutes, see who joins. Oh well, Stephen and Susanna are already here. Holy smokes, I think you were here before I was. It's amazing. You all are super speedy. Well, how are you all doing today? Getting stuff done or taking care of business? It's been a bit nonstop on my end. By the way, there's always a delay, so whenever you write a comment, I don't see it, I don't think, for like 15 to 30 seconds. So if it ever seems like, why am I not responding right away, it doesn't come through immediately. But oh, thank you, Susanna. Well, I'm your biggest fan too. Cooking dinner, nice. Early dinner. Good afternoon. Hey, Martin Elson, thank you so much for joining us today. Hey, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you being here. And Leslie, just for your sake, we're going through a series. This is part 6 of a series. So if you do ever want to join us, listen to the rest of it, and if it encourages you, join us for the rest of them. But we're basically just looking through a series of random topics we've put together regarding the whole idea and concept of how deconversion from Christianity really changes us. There's so much that changes, and it helps us. It helps me. I hope it helps you all to think through some of the ways that we've changed. So, and this is a bit of a hodgepodge. I just thought through a bunch of different ways. There's no rhyme and reason. It isn't like the ones I started with in part 1 are more important than the ones, or we're not building up to the high point at the end. They're just random things that I thought changed during our deconversion. So what I'll be doing, Leslie, is just going through maybe 3 or 4 different topics. After each one, I'll sort of jump into the comments for a second and see if anybody has any comments that relate and so forth, and then we'll jump into the next subtopic. So thank you so much for joining here. Shannon Meshbane is here. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. And Ed, thank you so much. I'm so sorry it's been such a hard journey, and I relate. I really relate. Absolutely, Leslie. Becoming evidence-based is important. Yeah, for sure. So just to jump in here, I've got a few people in the live stream, and we'll do, I'm sure we'll get a few more here, stragglers, but just to jump right in, and we'll go for about an hour. But one of the things that has helped me a lot is, and let me actually pop this up in the banner here, as I did before. It makes you reevaluate Yahweh, the Yahweh character, and wonder how you ever saw him as good. And I know that's kind of obvious, but I'd like to dig into it just a little bit in ways that I hope are helpful. It makes you reevaluate Yahweh, should say the Yahweh character, and wonder how you ever saw him as good. And, we know at this point, being deconverted from Christianity, that he's not a god. He's just a character, a literary character in a myth. And he is a tribal warlord god. He was originally the son of Elyon and Asherah, and he eventually got merged where Elyon and Yahweh became the same. And he was married to Asherah, and then eventually they took Asherah out, probably for patriarchy. And that's the stuff that helped us deconvert, to realize this is just mythology. It's evolved, it's evolving, it's syncretism. But I don't want to look at it from that perspective yet. I mean, just kind of sort of put a pin in that for a moment and think about really not what we know about that character now, but what we thought about him when we were Christians. When we were Christians, we absolutely revered him as, of course, the source of everything, the source of the universe, but also the ultimate source of goodness and kindness. And of course, when you deconvert, that begins to unravel, and his halo cracks and his throne sort of wobbles. But it tells us a lot about us, that we needed to learn those things. We needed to learn those things about him. We needed to do the hard work, but there's something about humanity that is okay with a tyrant, and that will shake you up. it shook me up a lot to realize that's actually what got me out of Christianity. Most of you know my story, but I was teaching the kids about basically songs regarding the takeover of the land of Canaan by Joshua and the people. And it shook me to my core, thinking I have to teach my kids about, slaughter and genocide and land theft and all these horrible things. Am I really okay with standing behind that? And that was what led me into a 3-year journey that eventually led me to deconvert. But it's a really strange thing to unlearn reverence, to sort of disarm this sacred mask that we had over the sacred halo over Yahweh. Again, he wasn't just a character. He was real. He was the center of our universe. He was our moral compass. He was the comfort of our lives, our hope for this life and the life to come. He was certainly the judge. He was our silent observer in every bit of your life, in your mind, in your everywhere you walked, everything you did, everywhere you said. He sort of hovered everywhere. He was in the big picture. He was in the little things, the minutiae. He lived, as it were, inside of our nervous system. He shaped everything we said and all of the silence. He sort of whispered to us all the time. And we grew to love that. We loved his presence. We called him Father, Lord, Abba, friend, Savior, King. And when you come back to the text now, you really come back to it with different eyes. You're willing to flinch a little bit, to confront what you see there, and to see that there is ugliness there that you used to call beauty. It's very familiar when you've read those stories over and over. I mean, I think a lot about even something like the story of Noah. Even kids that don't grow up in Christian homes probably know all about Noah and the ark and the animals. It's so familiar to us. But when you look at it through fresh eyes, what you find there is that it's not the God you thought you knew. You felt like he was your shepherd and his love never fails and all that kind of, syrupy, ooey gooey stuff. But instead, you're realizing this is a God truly of genocide. And he's calling it a good thing. He's saying these people deserved it. This is justice being enacted on wicked people, including women and children, old people, animals. God drowns the entire planet in the Noah story, and yet our focus is on Noah and his family. And we had this just poured out to us as this is the story of salvation. Look, you can't do it yourself. There's a flood of judgment coming, but you cannot shut that door. God has to shut it for you. Just get in the ark and let God shut you in and keep you safe. But our focus was off of the flood of destruction. A God who completely destroys the earth like that. And you're supposed to sit back and applaud and thank him for it. Yay! God is doing such great things, and we're part of his story. We read about him hardening Pharaoh's heart. And Pharaoh tried to soften his heart, and it says God hardened it again, just so he can show off. He got angry when the people touched the Ark of the Covenant to stop it from falling. And we read many passages where he punishes children for crazy things like picking up stones on the Sabbath, anything like that, and talking back to your parents too much. But he also punishes children for their parents' sins. It says for many generations to come. And he demands blood to get all this resolved, for forgiveness to take place. And in many ways, if you question it, it basically becomes a crime worthy of death. And he was so coercive. And there was so much fear that dominated this. We talked about that earlier today. But you begin to see a pattern. And so much of it relates to the way that we would see patterns in abusive and or narcissistic people in our lives. You can't see it at first, but when you see the pattern, it shocks you. He doesn't act like a universal source of love and truth. He acts like a Middle Eastern tribal god, tribal deity he's got a fragile ego and a strong taste for power. He's basically a warlord. And you trace through all these hints and fingerprints of patriarchy and conquest and certainly tribalism and sectarianism. They're all woven into this myth. And it's all just a big legacy of dominance. I want to control you and empower and have power over you on the most horrific levels. Not just like I want power, so give me a tithe. Like I want power, or else I'm going to kill you and your children. And he chooses favorites. He uses fear to keep everybody in line, and he kills the dissenters. He demands total loyalty, and he basically he's trading ethics for obedience. That's one of the hardest parts of this. Is he's basically saying, I want you to obey, and if you will obey, you have to live by ethics part of the time, but then I'm going to ask you to fully obey me, be fully loyal, and in doing so, you're going to have to be unethical. And I think a lot of us are seeing that in current days, where we grew up saying, Jesus says to love your neighbor. Who is your neighbor? Your neighbor is anybody. And then Trump and MAGA come along, and we're just like, oh, so you didn't really believe those stories. You didn't really believe anybody is your neighbor. We were taught this. I mean, this is not, MAGA is not a sidebar to real Christianity. It's woven into the hardcore DNA of Christianity. He basically wants to be morally independent, and he wants us to excuse it in the name of holiness. And so we're basically saying, because he's the savior, we're okay with the oppression. And certainly we would, again, like I said before, we would excuse it with, oh, his ways are higher than our ways. Or some people would do these gymnastics where it's like, that's Old Testament justice and it's a holy mystery. But we were basically trying to make cruelty somehow sanctified and virtuous, and it just can't be. But if you're going to sacrifice on that altar, the altar of Judaism and Christianity, you have to give your consent. You have to give it up, I should say. You have to silence your voice as you're doing your sacrifice. But when you strip away all of the worship songs, oh, he's just this good father, he's so loving, and so, you just want to curl up in his lap and call him daddy. When you get rid of all the footnotes and all the emotional manipulation and sort of that existential dependence that we all had, you're left with a character who's just a narcissistic, psychopathic tyrant in the sky. And he's got like this silhouette of divinity, like, I'm all powerful and I made everything, and I brought you into this world and I'll take you out. He's got this silhouette of being a god, but he's more just like a little baby. He's more like a toddler with power. He's completely dominated by aggression and hierarchy and dominance and patriarchy. He's a dictator with supposedly infinite power, but this is omnipotence having a temper tantrum all the time, and being jealous and being arrogant and pompous, narcissistic, and we raised our hands to it. We thought of it as worship and a good thing, and it sends chills down your spine, because we were praising him for it. We were singing songs about his wrath like it was somehow beautiful. And we quoted verses about fearing him. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All kinds of stuff like that. And that felt to us like this is the starting point of being truly intimate with God. We supposedly, at least we said, we crave to be close to him. We crave that intimacy. We crave that relationship with God. And we told children, our kids, and our parents told us that God is love and God loves you. And immediately we would finish that sentence with, God loves you, but he will burn you forever if you don't believe the right things. It's like this is terror they've tried to rephrase it or recode it in language of love. We felt so much comfort from it, and you have to step back at a certain point and say, I mean, in a snarky sense to yourself, like, what the hell? But you also have to step back in a more, philosophical sense and say, what was going on? Why did I love my captor? He wasn't divine. We know he's just a literary artifact. He's a psychological projection. He's a cultural construct, woven together by people who were going through seasons of storytelling, but certainly probably in there at some point, true actual conquest and survival and fear. But it was all basically setting up a worldview filled to the brim with trauma, toxicity, and this totally man-made mixture of tribal politics, patriarchal values, and these maybe ancient attempts to explain suffering. But when you see past all that and the blinders fall off, and usually most of us, they fall off pretty permanently, and unseeing it becomes next to impossible. And you look at this leftover myth and you realize that the God who, for example, commanded Abraham to kill his son was not setting a moral example. He was just mirroring the brutality of that time. And if it had been true, the God who sent, the two bears to maul and kill the 42 children for mocking Elisha, the prophet, that was like absolutely unhinged. And in the big picture of stories that include us in terms of the theology, a God who creates people with this sin nature and puts them in a spot where they're going to be absolutely set up to be tempted, and then punishes them for it forever. That this is just a tale in twisted, sadistic authoritarianism. And you see that this mythology really is just a psychology of how power dynamics work. In any other context, we would not admire this. We'd straight up call it abuse. We call it narcissism. This is a textbook case of someone traumatizing other people. And we'd say, let's do an intervention. Let's rescue people from this. We wouldn't sing hymns to it. But now on this side, we obviously stop worshiping that. Again, we don't hate God. We just grew up and realized he's not there. But we do have moral clarity that we couldn't see before. And we know that we no longer need this celestial warlord to tell us what's right and wrong. We're not confusing fear and reverence anymore. And when we see cruelty, we're going to call it what it is. And we're not going to go down that road anymore. Yahweh becomes what he should have always been, what he really always was. He's just a relic. He's a symbol of an older, harsher time in human history. But he's basically a psychological scapegoat for the pain of being alive and not having existential answers. He was just a narrative for controlling you and controlling me. And again, we go back a lot to the words reclaiming your life, reclaiming your identity. But I think this is where we're reclaiming our moral imagination. We're, in a sense, rewriting the story, and we're re-inhabiting our consciousness, re-inhabiting our own life story, our own human story. And we get to say, in a sense, I know you can't really talk to God, but if you could just pretend for a second, you get to say to God, as it were, I was wrong about you. You're really a nasty, nasty character. And how I ever thought of you as a good father is beyond me, but I will never be confused again. And I don't owe you anything. No allegiance, no apology, no fear, nothing. I don't owe you silence. I don't owe you praise. I'm just done. I'm completely done. And that is a beautiful place to be. But I encourage you, in many of these, I'm touching the tip of the iceberg. And by the way, some of these I'm going to use as a launch pad for individual, much longer monologues I'll do eventually with some of these, because some of these are like, I'm hitting just the tip of the iceberg, and I want to go much deeper. But for the sake of this, we're going to sort of chop it off after every 10 or 15 minutes. But just to wrap this first part up, when you get to that point where you see what Yahweh really is, you have to go past the Yahweh character to you and me to myself. You have to say, what does this tell us about us and about our parents, of course, our grandparents, people that passed it down to us? But what does it tell us about us in general as humans as to why we can look at absolute savage cruelty and call it wonderful and good and loving? And of course, what does it do to our lives and our relationships when we have that as the premise that the most loving relationship is one of total abuse? You realize that you really have your wires crossed. And if you're going to be healthy, you have to not just say Christianity is mythology, but this whole thing distorted how I see good and bad, how I see morality, how I see cruelty. It's an amazing journey. And I wish you well on this part of it, because this became the crux of the matter. It wasn't the only thing, and honestly, it should have deconverted me. It didn't. What deconverted me was the comparative mythology, but this should be enough to say this makes no sense. It's not a good God. And the fact that we all wanted to go to heaven tells us a lot, that we would rather spend our time in a perfectly set place that sounded perfect with a psychopath and a bully and an abuser. We'd rather spend time with him than anywhere else. And once you see that, you're like, wow, this thing did a number on me. It really did. You can't take it back, but you can admit you're way, way wrong. And that now you can, your eyes see better than ever. And you have much more, maybe not 20/20 vision, but much better than before. I want to go to a few comments here and then jump into the next topic. Let's see here. Yeah, we used to just gloss over the details, and it's carried over to our morally deficient culture in regard to women, children, animals, the earth. Yeah, very good point, Shannon. Politics and religion are intertwined, and it's really nasty. Yep, it's inexcusable. They use projection when they're doing what they're blaming others for doing. Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. They're literally doing the things that they're saying are bad. It's insane. Love your neighbor. And by the way, we're going to put our neighbors in prison and separate parents from children and deprive them of basic food. It's crazy. We have family members who still believe, yeah, same thing. So many of us do. And it's heartbreaking because you wish they could see it. And it doesn't make sense, but it does help me to remember that I couldn't see it for a long time. And that there's hope yet. You feel like, man, these people will never leave, but a few people will. A few people will get out. But it's a shame that it won't be on our timeline for sure. Makes me wonder about why people want to believe that guff. Yeah, exactly. Yes, Shannon and all that. It's infuriating seeing the us, them mentality and neglecting not only them, but ourselves. We neglected ourselves. Yeah. Indoctrination is very deep, and sometimes it's delivered with nice words. Wordcraft is devious. Yeah, well said. Martin, when indoctrinated by it, you don't see it. Yeah, you really don't. Let me go to another topic here for today. Again, shifting gears. Again, if any of you feel like, wow, that topic was one we could have hovered on that one for a while longer. Believe me, some of these are going to come back. Some of them are going to come back very shortly. But I'm just trying to do this series, for maybe another 3 or 4 days, and then I'll be doing more one-offs where I take some of these as well as others, and just sort of dwell on them for a while. But the next topic for today is that how deconversion from Christianity changes us is that it brings our childhood back into sharp relief. And I want to pop that up here. I'm going to explain what I mean in a second. I could give a longer title, but I'm just going to explain it. But I'm going to start with this again. It brings your childhood back into sharp relief. And I know this is probably going to be not as fun of a topic because it's going to be painful to think about. Like wow, I'm trying to heal from that. Let's not open old wounds, all that. But sometimes when you reopen them, you heal them better. I would say that it brings our childhood back into sharp relief when you deconvert, because you start to realize that you were raised in a psychological system. We thought of it in a sense mostly as a belief system, but really it was a psychological system. And I remember the songs and the flannel. Did you do flannel graphs where it was like little paper that had the fuzzy stuff in the back and they would stick it to the different boards? Flannel graphs were just like part and parcel of my childhood. And of course the memory verses. But when you really get to a certain point in this process, you see that these were very early tools of control. This was meant to condition you, especially to the fear, but it was meant to form your identity. You were basically being put into a mold. Your identity was being put into a mold and squished and molded, and you were being tethered to the concept of obedience and bowing your knee. And you begin to recognize that from the cradle on, your mind was not safe in your own home. I know that's hard to think about because in some ways we're indicting our own parents and saying that. And that's, we have to be careful to not play the victim card here. We don't want to say that there's no way we can learn, take something good from our childhood and still move on. But at the same time, I think we need to be honest. We weren't safe in our own homes. And there's a moment, eventually in deconstruction where something hits you and that it wasn't just that you believed these life-shaping ideas. It's that you were raised on them and steeped in them. They were what you ate. They were the tea bag put in the water. You were formed by them before your critical thinking ever had even a chance to stand on its own. Your intuition had no choice. It had no chance. The voice that your intuition was going to create was just nowhere near even forming it. And you start to remember the bedtime prayers, ask Jesus into your heart, or risk hell. Those felt board stories, Noah's Ark, again, told with all these smiling little animals, and they skipped the screams of drowning humanity. Again, this cheerful myth overlaying ancient tribal terror. The Vacation Bible School songs that always equated joy with obedience and obedience with worthiness. If you are obedient, you'll have joy in your heart. What is it? I've got the joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay. And when you're obedient, then you're worthy. You're worthy, not worthy in the sense, at least in my denomination, and in my tradition, not worthy of salvation. Salvation is only given by sort of declaration. God declares you worthy, even when you're not, if you just simply say the right words. But once you are saved, your obedience is what makes you worthy as a child of God, to be told by God essentially, I'm proud of you. Well done, my good and faithful servant. And we had these altar calls and the testimonies and the puppet shows. And I remember puppet shows and the mannequins, all this stuff endlessly about sin and salvation. And eventually you see your childhood canvas was painted with archetypal concepts of triumph and salvation and terror, all in these big strokes, victory and violence blended together in these visuals. And the way that the adults smiled so happily when you recited your verse. Here you go, you get a little star, you get a little crown, or you get a little piece of candy. And you learned early on that there was a sense of peace and stability in this home and this church, that as long as you stayed with the party line, that peace would be very nice. And you learn, do not threaten the status quo. And on this side of it, again, it starts to click. This was not education. This was programming. This was a curriculum for you to learn how to conform. This was all about submission. And the kindest, most loving, most supposedly trustworthy people in your life handed you a cage, or arguably shoved you into it. It was perhaps beautifully decorated, but they shoved you into a cage, not necessarily because they were evil, but because they were in a cage too, and they wanted you to be in the cage. Misery loves company. They were captives worshiping their chains, and they wanted you to become a captive worshiping your chains. And it's heartbreaking. And you start to see how early your agency was stolen from you, and how young you were when you were taught to distrust yourself or your body, and how fast and thoroughly you learned how so much was dangerous. So much was dangerous. And how often, your basic curiosity had to be traded in for conformity. And you basically castrated so much of your life. You certainly removed your questions. You wanted approval so badly. And so did I. And for those of us that were good at it, we had sort of the OCD of like, I'm pretty good at this stuff. I can memorize verses blindfolded with my hands tied behind my back, upside down in my sleep. I'm pretty good at this. I'm a perfectionist. And that spiritual OCD kicks in, and you're like, oh, I like that dopamine hit. They just said I'm a good person. I seem like I'm a good Christian. If the biggest story of my life is how to be a good Christian, I'm doing pretty good. I'm getting some brownie points here. And you and I were conditioned to obey before we had any idea what autonomy was. And we were trained to feel guilt. We had no way to consent to that. We had no way to discern whether it was really important or real or relevant. They wanted you and I to basically not just memorize the dogma, but weave it into our psyches. And so your mind, my mind, became a repository of somebody else's worldview. And it was truly an inherited faith. Even if you eventually claimed it for your own and said, no, I believe it too, it was still an inherited faith. And the hard part about all that is again, I've touched on this a lot, but it doesn't feel like abuse at the time. It feels like this is the greatest story ever told. I love how later some people have said it's the greatest story ever sold, but at the time it felt like the greatest story ever told. It felt like community and care and love and hope and, the best thing ever. You had so much spiritual sin debt, and God paid it all. And everyone around you it's just like we're raising you in the Lord, in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and we're protecting you. This is part of covenant faithfulness. And we're making sure that you're prepared for spiritual warfare, which is bound to happen. And you basically learn to smile, to serve, to sing the songs. And again, your real self was just slipping away into the shadows. And in a sense, all the while, there was this deeper self, this deeper you, that was just in those shadows, almost like shut into a closet, just waiting for safety, waiting for fresh air, waiting for truth, waiting for permission. And the longer you said, amen, amen, praise the Lord, you were basically saying, shut up to your real self. And as we look back on it, we're going back to our childhood. And by the way, I'm doing something that I don't know if everyone should do this. This might be something to say, for some of you, it would be way too triggering. But I'm working on sharing my story. I've shared it before, but I'm working on sharing my story in a way that it's going to be exponentially more detailed than ever before. I mean, I'm going to talk about everything, and we're not talking about like a 2-hour. We're talking like an 8 to 10 hour interview. And I'm doing it pretty cleverly. I'm going to be doing both sides of it. I'll be the interviewer and the interviewee, and I'll merge them together as if it's me interviewing myself, and it'll be pretty cool. But for the last couple of years, I've been writing down every little thing I can remember. And I write more things down every day. And that's why I'm like, I'm not ready to do it yet, because I keep remembering more things that are very relevant to my story. I remembered something even 10 minutes before we started here. But as you look back at these details, that part of you begins to reemerge, or like you see yourself. I mean, have you ever looked at a picture of yourself as a child and wished you could go back? Did you ever see that movie, the original Butterfly Effect? It's an amazing movie. For those of you that haven't seen it, I'm not going to give a spoiler alert, but just to give you the general concept of it. And it's an older movie, so spoiler alert is probably irrelevant. But this guy has the power to look at like his old journals or a picture of his 5-year-old birthday, and if he gets in the right mental state, he can literally go back with his current adult, like 25, 30-year-old mind into himself as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, from whatever he was going through as he journaled, and whatever he was going through as he was in that picture. He can go back to it and change something. He has like 30 seconds or a minute to change something about what happened. And I love the concepts that they wove into that movie, but it's an intense movie. It's a very sad, melancholy movie. But you get this sense of like, what if you could go back to your own self and tell yourself? And I know you can't, and there's no use in dwelling on it too much, but just for the sake of creativity and poetic license, what would you say to yourself if you could go back to that self that's on the side, just waiting in the dark, suffocating, waiting to come out, waiting for permission again to be whole? And you'd want to just have that person reemerge so much earlier in life. And it makes us arguably angry on this side of it. You don't necessarily hate your past, but you hate what was taken from you. And you hate that your innocence was removed, and you hate that your voice was stolen. I mean, this was a long-term major theft. And you were exploited for the sake of indoctrination. And you begin to see how you were taught to police your own thoughts. And you had no idea what was happening. But the trauma wasn't necessarily blaring or out loud in your face. It wasn't sirens, but it was systemic. It was quiet. It was culturally sanctioned. It was in your blood. It was in your dreams. It lived in your lullabies, in a sense, in your silence, and in the quiet and the whispers that you had in the Sunday school chairs as the teacher taught you. It was the little nod and the glances in the corridor of church, that sort of warning that was woven into the hymns. Sing these songs with your whole heart and mean it, or else. It was in the air you breathed, the stories we were told. And unlearning it is a lifelong project of reclaiming yourself. It will not. There is no quick fix for this. There's no fast patching of this. It's a deep excavation, and it's about learning to tell a new story, learning to write your own book. I'm a writer. I love to write. I've published 2 books, and I've got some more I'm working on. But think of your life as a story. Your life is a book. Your life is a poem. What's the narrative? How are you going to rewrite your book? How are you going to be the new narrator? Not just a character in the story, but the narrator. And how are you going to reroute that character? And you didn't choose what happened so far, but you get to choose what happens, hopefully, from this point on. You get to reclaim yourself and get unstuck from the scripts that they put you in your spiritual inheritance. And that shift from your inherited belief to your conscious autonomy is how your childhood stops being a trap, and it starts becoming a testament to your resilience. Your origin story becomes a platform, not a prison that you have to stay in for the rest of your life. What you come from is going to transform your story into a witness to the life that you now are building, piece by piece, with a lot of tears probably, but you are learning to have autonomy and sovereignty for the first time. And as you go back, as you do look at your childhood, whether you look at it in passing glances or in tremendous detail as I'm doing, I do hope that you're able to love on your earlier self, as it were, send poetic license messages to your younger self and say, I wish I could save you from what you went through. I wish I could have been there for you. I wish the stuff I know now I could send back in time. I wish I could have helped you to be who you needed to be earlier, and I'm sorry that I can't. But you almost need to reparent yourself and give yourself that grace, of course, that there's no way to undo it all. But in many ways, you and I have not been safe in our own skin and our mind. I say this a lot, but we have not been safe in our own skin and our own bodies and our own minds. And it is time to learn to be kind to ourselves. And you're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it unless we learn to take control of our story. So I hope that helps. I'm doing a lot of that. I look forward very much to sharing my whole story with you. I've got layer upon layer upon layer. Again, it might even be I might do it as one big story, one big video. I might do it in multiple that I chop up. We'll see. But it's a lot, and you have to be in the right mindset to safely and healthily do that. But I wish you well, no matter how deep you go into it. I'm going to go to a few comments here, and then we'll go into the last section for this session. Let's see here, where was I? Yep, lots of flannel graphs. Oh, thank you, Shannon. Preach it. You get into preacher mode sometimes, don't you? By the way, on that note, if any of you are thinking of doing an interview with me and you either have or have not contacted me about it, I encourage you to write out your story and definitely find parts of your story where you get into preacher mode, where you tell your story. So this happened and this happened. And it's moving, maybe boring or whatever, but it's just moving. A, B, C, D, and then you stop. You stop on this point and you hold it and you say, right about there, something happened. Let me tell you what happened. And you get silent, quiet, introspective, and you preach it. I loved my church. I loved my small group. I loved my relationship with the Lord, but just hold it. But I suddenly realized, and tell us, what did you realize? I was part of something patriarchal that stunk. It reeked. Yahweh was a psychopath. The Bible's full of contradictions, whatever it was. Hold it and preach it and say, that shook me to my core. There was a time, if calling it preacher mode is triggering whatever, find a way to find your voice. And when it's time to make the point, make it quiet and then make it loud, real loud. People need to hear what's on your heart. They teach you very young and it sticks with you for life. Yeah. Complete blind faith was the culture. Don't think about it. Accept it was your only option. Yeah. Sounds like church summer camp. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Shannon. I appreciate that very much. Yeah. It's likewise for me. It helps me so much. I mean, I hope I'm helping you all. It helps me just as much to think through it. Caged with other caged ones. Yeah. Only learned about autonomy in my 48th year. Deconversion from Christianity is healing from trauma. Yes. Bingo. Very well said. Hey, St. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us today. That's one of my reasons why I left. Couldn't stand to be a hypocrite when I knew better. Yeah. Revisiting sounds so beautiful. Haven't been kind to me. Yeah, that's the journey, really. In many ways, it's so much at first about just escaping from the mythology, but eventually it's much less about the Bible, and it's much more about you and you. It's a private conversation between you and yourself, which is fascinating. It feels like it's so much like it's me against the church, it's me against the Bible, it's me against the Yahweh character, it's me against Jesus, it's me against the theology and the hymns. Like it is at first, but eventually it becomes a very private, intimate conversation between you and yourself. So I'm going to go into the next topic. And this one I think is a good one. I'm going to probably not go as deep on this one because I think it's probably somewhat obvious. But I think it's worth talking about for a minute. It deepens your empathy. Deconversion from Christianity changes you by deepening your empathy. When you look at Christianity, you get the sense, at least the Christianity that I grew up in, it's changed now, but the Christianity that I grew up in really focused on being empathetic, like feel other people's pain so that you can meet their felt needs and then share the gospel. But for all of us who deconverted, there was this sense eventually to realize that we weren't quite so empathetic as we would have liked to have given ourselves credit for as Christians. And we become more empathetic, not in spite of leaving the faith, but specifically because of it. We spent our time, by and large, vocally or in our heads, judging people through our lens of sin and salvation. And on this side of it, we have a new kind of compassion that gets born out of that. But there was this nonstop sense of like, I need to look at every person in this room and say, are they saved? Yes or no? And if they are saved, are they honoring God? And if you say no to either one of those, you have a job to do. You have to get them saved, or to at least be faithful to share the gospel, and you have to encourage them to move towards purity, towards God, that honor God with your life. And in a sense, we really didn't have empathy. Empathy had very strict limits, and it sounds strange to say it out loud that way, because Christianity loves to market itself as a faith of compassion. God so loved the world so much. It was like this very public promise, but in private, it wasn't that way at all. And we see these pictures in our heads of Jesus is the shepherd with the lamb. He's the good Samaritan, and there's the fruit of the Spirit, and all these ways in which everything is just love and kindness and gentleness. And in reality, in practice, the compassion was so conditional, so contingent. The mercy was very transactional and filtered. It was bound, and there was a fence around it. It was very rigid, that you could feel for someone, you could feel the empathy for someone, but only if they were on this sort of storyline, this arc of redemption. And you could love the sinner as long as they weren't celebrating their sin. And if you found someone that was broken or traumatized in some way, you could serve them, help them heal, but only if your service has this little hook in it, this bait of the gospel. So your mercy is like you're fisher. You're a fisher of men, and you have a hook. That wasn't empathy. That was, let's say it together, that was recruitment. We were recruiting more people to join our cage. We might have wrapped it in kindness and sentimentality, but behind all of it was the threat of hell. When you look past all of what we were supposedly doing to what we were really doing, we were basically just saying, I must have you be part of our club. And if you refuse to join, I'm going to turn this into threats, really nasty threats. I did that, by the way. I've shared this before, but I very actively gave out tracts. I gave gospel presentations on the streets of Philadelphia. I did what's open air campaigners, the paint boards. Have you seen that, where it looks like you're drawing just blocks of paint, and all of a sudden you do a few quick strokes and there's like, whoa, there's a word there. I didn't realize that was where that was going. I thought it was just a big block of green with a black line around it. You put a few strokes and bam, there's a word. And doing that all over the place with children, and a lot of years and years and years of soup kitchen work, What was I doing? I was basically saying to the people, you will get your soup, you'll get your soup and your bread and your drink after I get you for 45 minutes to share the gospel. The hook, of course, is the food that they're desperate for. And I'm going to have my time first to threaten them with the gospel. And I did that to my shame. I readily admit it. I did it for years, many, many years. I can't even remember how many. I was so driven. There were times I was part of a group, but there were times that I was literally like the point person. You know, we were, I remember years even as a teenager where our youth group was invited to come down and do the soup kitchen work. And nobody would sign up except me. For years, I would go by myself. And they came to know me and appreciate me as like a bit of a young leader. And they gave me responsibility. And I preached over and over to these homeless people before they would get their soup. That's what we did. And when you look at it from the other side, you start to realize that your humanity was not really there. And at this point, once you deconvert, you feel like it rushes in. It's like this torrent. You're vulnerable. You realize they're vulnerable. And you realize the kind of compassion that you thought your heart was showing wasn't there. But you also, in the coolest sense, you see that you have compassion that you didn't know your heart could hold. Its capacity is astounding. It's like something you're discovering about yourself. I have so much more compassion now than I've ever had. And I'm not going to use it to try to fix somebody or convert them. You know, my intentions to convert people has now been abandoned. But now I can look at someone not as like I'm up here and you're down there. I'm the superior person because I'm the preacher or whatever. I'm saved and you're not. We're not me up here, you down there. We're eye to eye, shoulder to shoulder. We have a quiet solidarity as humans, and we see people's flaws as survival strategies. We see that beliefs that people have are often just shields for their pain, and that their identity is beautiful, and it doesn't have to be changed and renewed. Their selfhood, their who they are exactly as they are, is just fine with us. And when you get to that point where you stop pathologizing people, you start to see people as humans first. Maybe you start to see you no longer see addiction, I should say, as like this moral failure. And you stop assuming that poverty is laziness. And, the idea that queerness, of course, for all of us in fundamentalism, queerness is not rebellion against God's sexual design. And mental illness is not a spiritual battle. As so many of us were told, you don't need medicine. You need more verses, more preaching. And you begin to see people and you look at them with tears in your eyes and you say, what pain are they carrying? What trauma shaped their lives or their reactions? What system failed them? How can they have a chance to feel safe and seen and whole again? And you start to ask the same questions about yourself in that process, which is really cool. Your examination of how you see them, but also of how you see yourself. Your self-inquiry that is coming out of your new compassion leads you to have more empathy for them and for yourself. You denied them empathy before, and you denied yourself empathy, and you stop beating yourself up. And you stop trying to do all these little things where you're jumping through hoops. That kind of empathy is just beautiful. It's human. And I remember when I first moved to Georgia, I was up in Pennsylvania and I moved to Georgia, and I was of the mindset that homosexuality was wrong. And I spent some time with a salesman who had sold me a car here in Georgia when I first moved here. I was hoping that I could just take the bus everywhere. I hadn't used a car much in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia because I was using the bus and the train all the time. And it worked out really well. And I liked it. I did it for years I had no car for a long time. But I thought maybe I could get away with that in Georgia, and I couldn't. So after a couple of weeks, it's like, you got to bite the bullet. You need a vehicle. And the guy that sold me the car was a very, very nice professional guy who was a Christian. I was a Christian at the time, and I asked him, what church do you go to? And as we talked, because there's all kinds of paperwork that has to be signed, and you have to go through all these hoops. But I just kind of asked him about his walk with the Lord, and he's like, well, I kind of feel close to the Lord, but I also feel like I'm an outsider because I'm a gay man. And of course, your red flags, your spidey senses go up as a Christian, like, what? Wait, what? But I remember distinctly thinking to myself as I stopped myself from, number one, saying anything horrible, which I'm glad I didn't do, but also as I just let him tell his story. I mean, I really let him tell his story. I don't quite know how I got through that with my old belief system, but I let him tell his story. And I remember feeling so much empathy for his journey. And he felt like he kind of wanted to be in the church, but he didn't belong there. And when you get to a point where you can reclaim your humanity again, and you can say, man, I understand, or at least I care. And I'm not worried anymore about whether you're made in the image of God or whether you are redeemed and going to heaven. You're a fellow human. You're a brother, not in Christ, but a brother of a brother or sister in the human sense. Your blood, your breath, your muscle, you're conscious. You have memories. You have pain. You have hope. There's this raw core of humanity that's there, and I shudder at the reality that we are losing our humanity in this world, specifically, I think, because of Christianity and Judaism. The fact that Gaza can continue even to, the brief interruption to the ceasefire that happened today or yesterday, they're killing people like they're nothing. Like it's just like, that flower, that grass needs to be cut down, so mow it down. And that's like they're mowing down people as if it's grass. It's shocking to your system, but you realize Christianity made you cold and callous. And leaving Christianity gives you more empathy and love. It helps you respect people, even respect Christians. I don't respect the belief system, but I care and respect them more than ever because I know what it feels like. And I know some of the struggles that many of them are facing. And I really hope that we can continue on this path of empathy. I know the Christians' current mantra is empathy is a sin. Empathy isn't, sin isn't a thing, obviously, but if it were, empathy would not be a sin. Empathy would be your saving grace. Empathy would be your saving grace. And it's certainly our saving grace as deconverted people. And I love it, but I hate it, but I have to say it. We have so much more love in our hearts than Christians ever did, especially knowing that we're not doing it out of a response of thanksgiving or of a fear of judgment or a hope of a reward. We're just doing it because we want to. Why do you want to help somebody? I just want to. I remember a couple months ago sharing that with my kids. We were pulling over and this guy was stuck in the middle lane. It was like a lane on either side. His minivan had stopped and he barely spoke English, but he was just stuck and he was in danger of somebody smashing into him. And I happened to have some orange cones and I pulled the car over to a parking lot where the kids would be safe, but they could see me. I put these orange cones out so traffic would be diverted. And I helped him push his van to the side so that he wouldn't get hit. And when I got back in the car and I talked to the kids, I specifically went through this. I said, why did I do that? Did I have to do it? No. Do I get a reward for doing it? No. Am I doing it out of some kind of obligation? No. I just want to. I just want to love on people. And that's a beautiful thing. It's one of the most beautiful things of deconversion is you can just love on people because you just want to. You just want to. So let me go to any quick comments here and then we'll see. We'll at least decide here in a second if I'm going to do a little bit more. I might do one more topic real quickly. That one pretty quickly. Let's see here. Just had a friend of mine talking to me about Jesus again. Oh, brother. They love to tell you and gaslight you. I get comments, by the way. I have to block people. I block people 50 times a day on YouTube. Sometimes very literally 50 times a day. But people all the time, you'll be sorry, come back to Jesus. Be patient with your friend. Yeah, absolutely. I just get frustrated at times, but I was there as well, stuck in the delusion. It was strong. Yep, we all went through it. Using tactics wisely. And I hope that guy left the church and found the love he deserves. Yeah, I hope so too. Well, I think we've got time for one more. And let me see here. Let me pick what I want to do here. Let me look through my notes. Give me 1 second. Got a bunch of notes as to where I'm going to go with this, but I think I see where else. Do one more for this hour. And by the way, I'm going to jump one again. If my voice holds out, I'm going to do one more from 6 to 7 p.m. tonight. But the last thing I want to talk about is that it really allows you to, deconversion allows you to re-examine what you thought love was and what it really is. It allows you to re-examine what you thought love was and what it really is. You know, Christianity taught us that love was wrapped up in things like sacrifice and submission, enduring to the end, of course, obeying God without question, having blind faith and obedience. And it really is, on this side of it, I think you'd see it's like a cheap devotion. It felt at times just like so grand and eloquent and wonderful, like, wow, we're just obeying. We're honoring God so much. But, when you deconvert, you do ask pretty soon, is love really supposed to feel like and be merged with fear? And am I really supposed to have felt like I was a hostage? Love was the centerpiece. That we were told, again, that was what Christianity, that was its hallmark. That's what set it apart. It was not law. The law was like Judaism, but Christianity was opposed to it. It was the love and the grace. It's not ritual. It's love. It's not the old celebrations and the old sacrifices. There's just one final sacrifice of Christ, and it's love, and love your neighbor, and love never fails. It sounded so beautiful, and it sounded so simple, but in reality, I think you could argue that it was dangerously simple, because what we were shown in practice was something so different. This was a very broken, fractured foundation centered around supposedly God's affection for humanity. And as we followed in the footsteps, where God's the big example of love, and then we're supposed to follow in his footsteps and also be loving. Love to us as disciples at that point in our journey meant laying yourself down, dying to your desires, sort of this self-annihilation, staying silent and forgiving before you're ready, perhaps, submitting, even if it feels like you're breaking inside, obeying your parents, your teachers, your pastor, obeying the Lord, even though you're confused or it hurts, and really enduring to the end, even if you feel like you're not safe. I remember we just made it such a huge, wonderful thing to think about being martyred for God. It'll be so good if someday the Russians come and put a gun to our heads and say, spit on the picture of Christ or I'm going to kill you. And we were crushed by all this love for God and love for other people that it wasn't really love. A lot of it was basically self-denial that we would have described more as spiritual maturity, but they were marketing your martyrdom and my martyrdom and saying this is like the highest way you can honor God, the highest way you can love him, the highest form of devotion. And that's what Jesus did. He suffered in silence, right? He obeyed unto death. He didn't resist. Excuse me. He turned the other cheek for sure. He could have called 10,000 angels to his side at any moment. And so when you suffer, when you do things to love other people who are hurting you and to do it ultimately for the love of God, you need to be willing to be emotionally, physically, relationally hurt and thinking that was a form of your love towards God and towards other people. And so your anguish, it's almost like the more anguish you let yourself get put through for the sake of loving God and loving others, that's your grade. Like you get an A+ if you're willing to go through more pain, more suffering. Your love was basically summed up in if you suppress yourself, suppress your needs, suppress your own mind, that therefore you're expressing your love for God. You need to absorb the pain and pledge, like I will put up with anything for the sake of this. And I remember one of the sickest things that I remember doing, and it wasn't just me, it was a bunch of us talked this way in the guys' dorm, but we used to say, God, we used to pray this, say, God, do whatever it takes to make me holy, whatever it takes. And basically we all knew what that meant. That meant make me, if I have 2 tracks, I can live my life where my whole body works just fine, but I'm dishonoring you with my life. Then if it takes you to break my legs, if it takes you to make me a quadriplegic, if it takes you to make me, whatever, give me a disease, like I would rather live my life as a quadriplegic, stuck in a wheelchair or in a bed, but honoring to you, than I mean, then to go live my life completely whole, kind of that idea of like, what good is it if you go into eternity, when you could have just, pulled out your eye and gone into paradise? Like, which one is really better? And for a lot of us, we were eventually willing to give our lives for the sake of loving God and loving others, even when it cost us a lot. Maybe it cost you your sanity or your identity, your health, and you just sacrifice was everything. And I remember so many times thinking about the people that I honored the most. I put them on a pedestal. They were people who said, I want to be spent for the gospel. Spent was a big word. I want to be spent, meaning I want to be exhausted. I want to be decimated. I want to be almost destroyed. I want God to allow the world to walk all over me if it will get the gospel out. And that was a source of pride, to be willing to say, I'll give up everything. I mean, Christ gave up everything. Why would I do anything less? He's my hero. He's who I follow. And so we sacrificed everything we could. And on this side of deconversion, that old definition of sacrifice and love begins to fall apart. And it feels like it's, a house built on sand, because you realize that how many of your relationships, whether they were romantic or your family, spiritual, in the church, they were sort of built on this coerced compliance. We were all obligated to each other. We were all in a sense of fear. We were all living in these bubbles of appeasement, appeasing God. There were these submissive survival tactics at play. And, being needed isn't the same thing as being valued. And we were mistaking each other's needs and filling those needs with worth and self-worth. And we were trying to figure out the whole time, just how do you be a good person? How do you honor God with your life? How do you love God and love other people? And we thought we were being so noble, but we were basically just putting ourselves through these ringers of sacrifice, serving others. And I would argue for a lot of the time, we were basically just teaching others to walk all over us, to keep taking from us. That if we endured, we could sort of prove our love for God and for the world. And you would see other people do this, and you could see them just being bitter. You'd see where they were like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to let the whole world walk all over me if I can be an example of the gospel. I will be sacrificed. I will carry my cross. And then a few years later, they were bitter as hell, and they gave up the whole thing. It's this long path where when you deconvert, you have to go through this disorienting time frame of redefining what love is: love for God, love for other people, love for yourself. And I'm speaking kind of nebulously, but I feel like I need to think on this one and come back to it at some point from some different angles. But self-denial, there's a time and a place for it. I'll put it that way. There's a time and a place for self-denial, but it's often not very honest. Your self-denial is basically often a way of saying, I don't think of myself that highly. And you're not, you think of yourself as suffering, but graciously, but you're not really that silent. Inside, you're very upset about it. And when you come to the point where you say, I need to honor myself in my life journey, actively care for myself, I need to not be blindly loyal, I need to tell the truth and have boundaries. My value is not earned through submission and my willingness to be walked all over. I deserve respect. I deserve safety. And this whole thing begins to just break down, and you refuse to be damaged anymore simply because you want to be devoted to Christ. You stop romanticizing the pain, and you stop believing that, this is what it's supposed to feel like. You realize you are letting other people abuse you, and you're perhaps abusing yourself, perhaps abusing other people yourself. And you have to get yourself to the point where you say, that's what I spent my life doing. I do want to be willing to sacrifice for other people. I do want to love other people. I do want to experience other people's love for me. I do want to be driven to a greater purpose. But we all need to be safe in this. We all need to be honest. We need to be protected. There needs to be a reciprocal nature to it. We need to give and take without guilt or some kind of obligation. And, when you step back from all this, you didn't just lose God's love. You lost a version of love and living out of the motivation of love that really wasn't love at all. This was like a counterfeit kind of weird affection. And again, I'm speaking about it nebulously. I'm not quite sure how to make it more specific, but I'm going to give it some thought. I'll come back to it on another time. But I think just the many, many ways that we were describing our lives as driven by love, they weren't. We were obligated to carry our cross. We were obligated to give up ourselves and our dreams and our personhood. And it's not love. Love has nothing to do with that. This was all, again, a form of control. And there's so much psychology woven into how this stuff messed with us. And I fear a lot for myself and maybe for other people too, but I fear a lot that so much of what we do is driven by a very deep desire to be approved. Everything was about, God's approval. And of course, again, it's the gospel. God doesn't approve of you. That's the whole point. He approves of Christ. Christ covers you, his righteousness. So, you're approved by declaration. God isn't saying you are worthy, but he's declaring you legally, judicially worthy, and therefore you're saved. But there's a part of us from the youngest days, whether it's all theology or just part of growing up with parents, that you want them to approve of you. And our, kids, in the neighborhood, you want so many people to approve of you and say, you're a good person and I accept you and I think you're great and you can be in our club and you can be in our whatever, our fun games here. Like, it was a horrible thing when you would, as a child, start picking teams like this, two teams for soccer, and you were always the last person chosen. Like, why? Like, why doesn't anyone want to pick me first? And when you would get picked last, it would hurt. We're driven so much by our desire for approval. And I think it messes with us a lot in romantic relationships and other relationships. And when you really get down to it, so much of what we do, we're not in control of our choices to the degree we should be. We're being driven by forces, many of them heavily influenced by Christianity, many of them driven by other factors that were going on at the same time. But this is, I hate to say it this way, because I know a lot of us cringed at this for years, but I think it's worth saying. You need to love yourself. Not in a weird woo-woo sense, but you need to love yourself. And that, if you really love yourself, truly, I think you'll have boundaries and self-respect where you will not ever let someone walk on you again. And that affects everything from the way that you would let a pastor talk to you or a supposed God talk to you, and certainly the way you would let other people in relationships talk to you and how you talk to yourself. So I think I want to think on that one and circle back to it at some point. There's probably a lot better ways to say that, but hope some of that helps. I'm just going to read a few quick comments here and then we'll wrap up for today. Orthodox Jews admit that Lucifer is their god. At least they believe so. They follow the Talmud, not the Bible. Yeah, the Talmud's an interesting, and the other books that they use, it's fascinating how there's so many things that change the way we perceive their worldview. Good, crazy. It's amazing. That's a whole world I do not know enough about. I'll admit it. Yeah. The slave mentality programming, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, you summed it up right there. Slave mentality programming. And it was, I think, slave mentality with the idea of you're my slave, so obey, but you better do it with act as if you really want to, like act like you're not my slave, but you are my slave technically, that's huge. Being needed isn't the same as being valued. Yeah, for sure. Helen, great to see you. A bit like leaving a narcissistic person in a relationship, a whole new way of learning is needed, and rewiring of our brains. We are worthy, and that's the change that is needed for so many of us. Yeah, very well said. So we need to start from that point and launch ourselves forward. Yep, good talk. Well, thank you all so much. Sorry again for my voice here. Trying to do as much as I can without overdoing it. But for anyone that can join us, I'll be back on between 6 and 7 p.m. Eastern tonight, and appreciate you being a part of the community. So love you all. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.